So we are up with Bob and the Hawaiian team on what the heck is Keck presentation. And they're going to tell us, it looks like we have similar themes. To give our timekeeper her due, you can always continue your conversations online if you need to. And I would encourage you to do that. Anyway, we'll move on to the Hawaiian team. I know I don't know everybody on the team. I know Bob because I spent a lot of time in Bob's world, So I understand that really well, but don't know much anybody else in Bob's world. But I'm sure you're all good folks. So I'm gonna quit yakking and turn the time over to the Hawaiian team. Go ahead.
Amy will go first, so you have permissions. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ed. And, I appreciate your trust in all of us, but certainly I know Bob as well. And knowing that he puts his trust in me makes me feel much more comfortable presenting to everyone else. And so, hello, everyone. I'll be presenting first today. I'm actually not from the Hawaiian team. My name is Amy Sproles. I'm from Humboldt State University, and I'm one of the campuses that was selected as one of the pilot campuses for the Keck project, Transcending Barriers to Success. And so I thought that I would go first today to kind of give you an example to try and describe exactly what the heck is going on with Keck, to quote Ed directly. So this was an incredible program that was spearheaded by Bob, by Ula Hasegar, both from Sensor Hawaii. As many of you know, that group has really pioneered incredible opportunities for all Native and Indigenous students through their transformative work, weaving Indigenous science and knowledge into STEM education through the University of Hawaii system and Kapiolani Community College. Based on their incredible successes, the Keck Foundation kindly awarded funding to help support other universities who are interested in doing similar kinds of work on their campuses. And so I'm here today representing Humboldt State University and our work developing place-based learning communities that have been designed to introduce all first-year STEM students to Indigenous knowledges in a manner that will allow them to move forward in their disciplines to help collaborate with Indigenous and tribal partners to mitigate social and environmental challenges. So I'm here today, I'm a faculty member in biological sciences, but I really must emphasize that this program was developed by dozens of HSU faculty, staff, students, administrators, and of course, our tribal collaborators. So we began this work in 2015 with the launch of our very first place-based learning community that really seeks to further STEM engagement and success by weaving many high impact practices, but also including the relationships of those practices with our local tribal communities on our campus. And so many of you may already know that Humboldt State University is on the lands of the Wiyot people. We're located in Gudini, but we are also surrounded by many contemporary Native American tribes and communities. So with this slide, you'll see this star here demonstrates that we are here right in the middle of Wiyot ancestral lands, but that there are many other communities that surround us. And I've included representation of many of the partners of this program are the Yurok tribe, the Trinidad Rancheria, of course, the Wiyot tribe, Karuk tribe, and then we also have other members, including the Blue Lake Rancheria. We have campus partners that have been around for decades to support Native and Indigenous students. The Indian Natural Resources Science and Engineering Program is the first that started, I believe, in the late 60s. ITEP, which is now the Native American Center for Academic Excellence, both those two student support groups really interface with students at both the undergraduate and graduate level from across campus to help provide them co-curricular supports as they navigate campus life and help try and pair their majors to their own communities and career aspirations. And of course, one of our strongest partners in developing this programming is our Department of Native American Studies. And so just to quickly summarize one of the primary goals of the PBLCs, it is really to provide purposeful curricular and co-curricular activities that incorporate real-world and community-based learning in a collaborative, student-centered environment that links STEM curricula to social justice, empathy, and equity matters of our local tribal communities. And so you can see our logic model across the top, where we hope that by doing this, we'll help support students along the trajectory to really empower them to retain in their discipline, graduate, and of course, return back to their home communities or go on to careers that really fulfill them as people and their values. The first place-based community that we developed, Klamath Connection, linked issues that are faced by the tribes along the Klamath River in our region to basic fundamental coursework that all students take in their first semester. So you can see in this image, HSU first year students who went to visit the Klamath River. Every year it's impacted by toxic algal blooms of Microcystis aeruginosa that begins in August and goes through the fall, which is not only the time of the salmon return to the river from the ocean, it also coincides with the ceremonies of the tribes along the river. And so it really does interfere with not just the ecosystem and the water quality issues, but really the cultural grounding that is necessary for all of those communities to thrive. And so by working together with our tribal collaborators, we were able to link the importance of understanding botany, math, basic chemistry, and the necessary component of working with tribal communities, or the communities in which you work and live, to help resolve community issues. Sorry, for some reason, I'm not able to advance my slide. One moment, please. There we go. A second place-based community that evolved a little bit later on is specifically for our first year marine biology and oceanography students. And then the goal of this program, which is called Rising Tides, is to connect those students with the Native people and the marine life in our place, so they better understand not just environmental issues like climate change that are impacting our ocean life, but really the social justice issues of the people of our place, specifically those of the Wiyot people and Trinidad Rancheria and Yurok, over the history of their time here in Humboldt County. These topics are woven throughout all their first year courses. And what I want to really emphasize is that the courses are not just GE courses, but it is in the STEM courses. There's an entire hands-on science experience that allows students to incorporate both Western science, Native science, and other Indigenous knowledges to really understand impacts of climate change in the Bay. But also we talk a lot about working with various tribes and other groups as you are a STEM professional in your place. And this is a course that's taken by all first year STEM students. All students also take Introduction to Native American Studies, and those topics that are included also focus on the history of social injustice in our region, and really the importance of Indigenous science knowledge in addressing these topics. And I'm really thrilled that we have such incredible collaborators in that department. I've listed 4 of those faculty members on this slide. And what's really wonderful about our Native American Studies department is that we have many tenure line faculty that are from our local tribes. And you'll be hearing from Caitlin Reed tomorrow in a follow-up conversation about lessons learned for tribal collaborations. After watching this morning's presentation by Dr. Sammy Matza and Jesse, I believe that they talked about the importance of training all students in how to interact with Native communities and how to be an ally. And so this is something that our programming does seek to address. And I just thought I'd throw this up here. We were able to conduct a survey with our KC freshmen from 2017 and 18. And what was really powerful is that 84% of them stated that they believed that gained knowledge of Native American cultures will help them in their future careers. And so you can see that breakdown there, and then some of the quotes that they included in that summary. And so I share this just to emphasize that we're hopeful that through these collaborations, through this programming, through the generous funding by Keck, the leadership of Bob and Ula and Sensor, that we really are hopefully making a difference as we train all STEM professionals to work with Indigenous communities and as partners to help resolve climate issues. All right, so that is our small pilot program up here at Humboldt State University. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ula Hasiger, who will talk a bit more about the great work going on at Sensor Hawaii. Ula?
I am unmuting, that helps. Aloha, everybody. I'm speaking to you from the island of Oahu in Hawaii. I'm at the windward side of the island, and what you see behind me is kind of in front of me. I've lived close to Kaneohe Bay in the Ahupua'a of Kaneohe. And I'm not gonna do a land acknowledgement because I realize that, as Kucha told us, Kucha that you just saw in one of Amy's slides, a real solid land acknowledgement would be at least 15 to 20 minutes. But I am speaking to you from the lands of the Kanaka Maoli or Kanaka Oiwi, the indigenous peoples of Hawaii. I am gonna share my PowerPoint. Can you see it? Oh. Not that kind of share.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm Dr. Ula Hasiger. I'm Director of Civic Engagement for the College of Social Sciences, but I'm also an anthropologist educated in Denmark. I've been working with indigenous rights issues, which speaks to some of the previous speakers' points since the early 80s, being a member of an organization an international organization supporting indigenous rights, which is kind of my entry to a lot of the work that I'm doing. I'm gonna talk to you about the Ma'alama Ina Ahupua'a program that we started in 1997. And I should have fixed this slide. We are still going on, although it's very much of a challenge during these pandemic times. The Ma'alama Ina Ahupua'a program is a program that exemplifies the development that we had experienced with the Keck grants work that I'm going to talk about in a minute. We started with wanting to adopt a highway and a beach. That was kind of something that you were doing in Hawaii. Then we call it Adopt an Ahupua'a, which is a traditional land division going from the top of the mountain out in the ocean. And then we realized that that was actually opposite of the indigenous perspective. In the Hawaiian mythology, the land is related as family to the people. And as younger siblings of the land, we have the obligation to take care of the land, which in turn will feed us. So Ma'alama means to take care of. Hanai is a word for adoption in Hawaii. So with the help of native speakers from the Ihao Island, we changed the name to take care of the Ahupua'a, meaning several, because of the nature of the conditions of the lands in Hawaii today. We went from a perspective of place-based learning to one of Aina-based learning. We wanted to not only give students and their families an opportunity to learn about the history of land use in Hawaii and the traditional use of land and the changes, we also wanted them to deeply experience that. Newer work by the very amazing and fast-growing field of Hawaiian scholars have adopted a term called Aina-based learning. Aina is a Hawaiian term for land, but again, it incorporates that relationship. So it's incorporate cultures and the knowledge of cultures, the way you practice living on the land. So these are our ancestors in 1995, 6, Bob Franco, Marion Kelly, another Quincell that I'll show you on the next picture, and my husband, Rick. We started creating this program where we basically just made an opportunity for students and others to get out and work the land and learn from the land and learn from the people of the land. So here is Nelda Quincell, well-known expert in seaweed, growing of seaweed in Hawaii. She is retired, and when she retired, Mike Ross, that you will meet a little later, took over the leadership from the KCC perspective. We early on did a division of labor that I was running it from UH Manoa, from a social science perspective, and Nelda, and then later Mike from a natural science perspective. They are both great. They're both been absolutely wonderful partners. The only thing is that Mike doesn't cook. It's a problem in Hawaii. Two of our current student leaders are David Chang, a Hawaiian musician, and Zia Nauta, who is a Chamorro and a very strong leader. Okay, sorry. What we do is that we try to take students to many places on the land, at least in the beginning, so they have an understanding of this whole ecosystem going from the top of the mountains out into the ocean. I'm not going to go into that. We have some pretty good videos explaining this, if you want to go to the STEM videos place. This is showing you that we now have to kind of adopt a different approach where we normally would come out in big work teams with 50 to 100 students from all kinds of disciplines and institutions, and not in school. Now we can only take about 10 at a time because of the COVID restrictions. So we are focusing more in on smaller areas, and this is also the area where I'm sitting right now, where we are working. The Hawaiian concept of kuleana, meaning responsibility and rights, is a very deep and rich concept that actually resonates very well with SENSA ideals. So SENSA stands for Science Education for New Civic Engagements and Responsibilities. We have been working with the national initiative for many years. Bob invited a SENSA meeting in Hawaii in 2010, but from 2013 we really pushed hard through, and we had a very happy kind of relationship between the SENSA ideals and the Native Hawaiian knowledge and knowing and practices that led to Hawaii actually becoming a SENSA model state. And that model state status was something that we took seriously, and with the National Center for Science and Civic Engagement, we used that as kind of a push to create for a project that we called Transcending Barriers to Success, which was funded by Keck. So here's the head Keck, Ed. Oh, sorry. What we wanted to do was really to try to get more Indigenous students and science educators into teaching and learning and understanding the value of Indigenous knowledges, to help Indigenous students feel more at home and do go through that kind of education that they felt that they wanted to go through. So we had these goals of making Indigenous and Western knowledge system connections for a redesigned curriculum, tackle grand challenges such as ecological and biocultural restoration, which is so important today. Supporting STEM success for Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander students. Of course, in Hawaii, we have most of the last two categories. And then building authentic, durable campus community partnerships for continuity and sustained positive impact on the environment. So we devised this project where Hawaii and Alaska were supposed to model for a number of pilot projects. But as you just heard from Amy's presentation, we learned as much, if not more, from Humboldt State as they learned from us. So it's been a wonderful connection, a wonderful collaboration, and given us many meetings, talks with inspiring people like Mike Dirkler from Salis Kootenai. So it's been fantastic. We have had a very strong support from the Center Society, and particularly also from the Center for Innovation West. So we created we created some grand challenges educational systems that I was going to show you a film. Bob, do I have time to do that?
Yes, you still have 22 minutes left, I think.
Okay, yeah, well, we also have Bob's presentation, so, and he's texting me. Okay, I will show you part of the work that we did at these Grand Challenges event. What was special about it was that they kind of progressed just like the experience we had with the Malama Inahupua program. We started out in a kind of Western way, and then gradually not only were talking about connecting Indigenous and Western knowledge, but we're actually practicing Indigenous ways of doing things towards our biggest event was the 2019 Grand Challenges event before the pandemic stopped that. But we continued, and this is, okay, here we go with Mike's presentation. I actually thought it was going to be the other one. So I'm going to have to stop share a second. I am sorry, I'm a little. Okay. I don't know what you can see. I hope you don't see all my stuff.
Right now, we just see you.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
Okay. All right, here we go. This is Mike Ross speaking. My partner.
So aloha, everyone. Thank you for this time. I wanted to share a little bit about some of the work that I do connecting Indigenous knowledge with Western scientific systems. As we know, Indigenous knowledge has accumulated over thousands of years, and really it is very similar to scientific knowledge. That is, it was gained through empirical observations of ecological phenomenon amongst people that have a very close and intimate relationship with the environment around them. So there are lots of hypotheses that can be generated from Indigenous knowledge. Of course, a hypothesis is just an untested, tentative explanation for a natural phenomenon, but these culturally relevant hypotheses can be generated by looking at just this extensive amount of Indigenous knowledge that has accumulated. I'll share a few examples of things I do in my ethnobotany classes at Kapiolani Community College. So this is an example here of indigenous knowledge locally amongst the Native Hawaiians. It's been documented that Native Hawaiians traditionally, when they were growing sweet potato or uwala in Hawaiian, would twist the vines around the base of the plant in order to induce more vigorous underground growth in the actual edible parts of the plant. And so it's an easy experiment that can be done with students in my class, where we grow some uwala vines and we twist the vines around themselves in one group, and then we have another group of plants that we grow without twisting the vines. We can then harvest the sweet potatoes at the end of the semester and compare the sizes of the tubers to see that the indigenous knowledge really does increase the amount of edible food that's produced by these plants, which of course is very relevant and important for a lot of issues that relate to food sovereignty and sustainability here locally in Hawaii. Another example is with another staple crop, kalo. Kalo is known as taro to many, but locally it's called kalo in Hawaii. The leaves of the plant can actually be cut off, and that induces more buds to form around the edible part of the plant, or in Hawaiian, these are called oha. And so another thing we could set up early in the semester with students is we can set up two groups of kalo that we're growing, some in which we do not remove the leaves and some in which we do remove the leaves. We can then harvest these corms at the end of the semester, and they can see that there are far more buds and oha that are created by following this indigenous method. This can increase the overall number of plants because each one of these buds can be broken off and grown separately. And then I've also been involved with some summer bridge programs for a number of years, and we've done similar things in using culturally relevant hypotheses to really introduce Native Hawaiian students to science and the scientific method. So this is another example of a native plant called a cocoa, which is endemic to the Hawaiian Islands. Euphorbia celestroides is the scientific name. And its leaves were used medicinally by ancient Hawaiians to treat all kinds of different health issues, but particularly women's health. Oftentimes the red leaves from this plant would be collected and made into a tea that women would consume after menstruation, which would help increase the amount of iron that's present in the blood. So one hypothesis that can come from this is that the red leaves contain more iron than the green or other color phases of the leaves. So we actually collected various color phases of the leaves and made teas from them. We then analyzed the iron content that was present in those various teas, and we saw that in fact the red leaves do contain more iron than the green or the blue leaves. This is actual data that students were able to present at a national conference as a result of some of this work. We also compared it to other species in this genus to show that the Hawaiians were selecting the correct plant that had more iron, because there are other species that are present that do not have the same iron content as the one that they use traditionally. So these are just some examples here of how indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge can be merged together to help indigenous students get introduced to the scientific method and to this type of research. And it's been quite successful in these examples that I've showed. Thank you guys for your time.
All right, thank you. Bob's turn. I don't think I need to introduce him. We are all in Bob's world, according to it.
Aloha, everybody. Thanks. Sasha, I can share screen now.
Yes, well, hang on. Sorry. Where are you? Let me make you a co-host there. Now give it a try.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, where did I put it? Okay. Let's see.
So while Bob is looking, we are going to hear a little bit more from Ed, from Mike tomorrow about his work. So continue on.
Finding my share screen here. Let's see here. It should be on my desktop. Where is it? Okay, I guess I'm going to have to present without the PowerPoint, but
Oh,
You see where your mute and video buttons are? Is it along that bottom toolbar?
yeah,
The green button that says with the up arrow?
yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I'm just not seeing it on my desktop here.
oh, you don't see your presentation?
On the desktop, yeah.
Okay. Well, Sasha, you have it too, right?
Sasha, can you handle it? Do you have it?
I think I do. Let me double check. What is the title? I have the
Yes.
NANREF September
Yeah.
2021, 8/29.
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll just start with what I'm going to cover is the transition between the Keck Transcending Barriers to Success project and then this current EPSCoR program that Ed is running. So do you find it there?
I do have it.
Okay.
Let me start it and share it. Hopefully it will look good since I have Keynote and it may have been done in.
Okay, that looks great.
Is it sharing the right screen?
Yeah.
Good.
No? Okay.
Looks good.
Yes.
Looks good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I did put my email on this earlier slide. It's just bfranco@hawaii.edu. Next slide, please. Okay, so the EPSCoR program, if you don't know, is the established program to stimulate competitive research. There are 28 EPSCoR jurisdictions, 25 states, and 3 island territories. The previous Transcending Barriers to Success grant actually worked in Arkansas, Hawaii, and Montana with the Salish Kootenai College. And then there's this gathering, I put the wrong dates on there, but September 14th and 15th. So next slide. Okay, so these are the 4 components of the Transcending Barriers to Success model that I put in the proposal to NSF EPSCoR. And they are to make Indigenous and Western knowledge system connections for redesigned curricula. And one of our presenters this morning talked about undergraduate curriculum. So we have spent a lot of time figuring out how do you integrate Indigenous knowledge into the curriculum, usually through active learning teaching practices such as service learning, undergraduate research, internships, hands-on learning, experiential learning. So really taking the learning out of the classroom, and that's really what ULA's Malama Ina Ahupua program has done. The second thing was to tackle grand challenges in environmental and natural resources and health that Indigenous knowledge can certainly help us address these very serious human problems in the world, and that these grand challenges become a motivation for durable partnerships between campuses and Native communities. And we're doing this to support STEM success for underrepresented Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian students. And finally, this is the part that I mentioned earlier in the MATSA presentation was, how do we build the kinds of durable campus community partnerships for continuity and sustain positive impact? We can't continue to just do these things from one grant to another. We need institutions to figure out how to do more effective outreach and engagement to create really long-lasting partnerships for real transformational change. Next slide, please. Now, I've done a lot of research around campus and community partnerships, and particularly with the Carnegie Campus Community Engagement classification. There is a science around partnerships that the Carnegie Foundation has been supporting. And I've kind of culled sort of some principles of partnerships or partnership practices, clear roles and responsibilities. This is part of it. I think we've heard a lot about relationship building, clear lines of communication, a recognition that both partners have both assets and needs. It's just not needs assessment. You also have to evaluate what assets each partner is bringing to the work. Then there needs to be some focus around a mutually agreed upon goals and temporal frames, reciprocity between the partners. Usually these temporal frames are 3 to 5 years. You try to get something meaningful done in that period, and then you go back and really assess the partnership itself. And one of the principles I think Ula and I presented on a lot is that these partnerships need to amplify Indigenous and community voice and humble the scientific and academic voices. Partnerships must be aspired to, not just simply asserted. In other words, they take work. They take intentionality around how you create durable partnerships. Next slide. Okay, so in the proposal, the EPSCoR, I began to sort of situate some of the literature, a very fast burgeoning amount of literature that's linking Indigenous and Western knowledge and management systems, traditional and place-based ecological knowledge, biocultural indicators. This is a frame that came out of Hawaii and some of the EPSCoR funded research by Native Hawaiian scientists here in Hawaii. Co-management, cultural ecosystem services, Native science and research, self-determination through community engagement and the ownership of science, and finally, climate change, Indigenous realism, collective continuance, and just decalling the Anthropocene. You can see that there's different types of foci here, and we're going to try to build this resource, build it up over the next year or so. Next slide. Here's the picture of people at work at the Grand Challenge Institute in May of 2017. Next slide. The 2019 Grand Challenges Institute was where we really focused, and we had a lot of really strong leadership from Manu Meyer on how to do that institute. Manu's at the University of Hawaii, West Oahu. And again, she emphasized the notion for place-based thinking. So we focused on the Ewa region of West Oahu. The beautiful picture on the right is water. It also looks like a piece of tapa cloth, but this was a really transformational institute and really made us think that we had more work to do and there would be other funders for that work. Next slide. So I'm going to transition a bit because we rarely get a chance to talk about how issues confronting Indigenous peoples on the continent, also those issues are ongoing in Oceania, in the region itself. So in 2009, I published a history of American Samoa with the American Samoa Humanities Council, and was a project born of love for the Fa Samoa and the respect I have for that culture. And that same year, there was a tsunami that hit American Samoa in 2009. And we began to sort of think more deeply about issues of climate change and severity of ecological disasters. Next slide, please. Next slide. That's just a reference to my work on that publication. Next. Yeah, so as we move out to the Pacific, it's roughly 1/6 of the planet. And there's a fair bit of, a lot of concern around sea level rise. Next slide. I'm gonna move through these pretty quickly. There is a Pacific sea level rise monitoring network, and we already recognize that there's a new displacement occurring as there was displacement in many Native American tribal communities. There is now an ongoing displacement in the Pacific, particularly in the Marshall Islands and the islands of Micronesia. As sea level rises, people are beginning to realize they may not have much future there in those small Pacific atolls. Next slide. Most of my research over the years has looked at the Samoa bioregion, both Western and American Samoa. And right now, in addition to sea level rise as a concern and climatic disasters, climate action caused disasters, there's the issue of fisheries and food sovereignty. Next slide, please. In the traditional times, Samoa, Fiji, and Tonga, people sailed between these places and shared resources, intermarried. So we sometimes think of these islands as being isolated when in point of fact, they were very well connected by very sophisticated navigation systems. And the Samoa, Tonga, Fiji triangle is noted for those kinds of trips that involve both intermarriage and trade. Next slide. Okay, so the Samoa bioregion, American Samoa, there's Tutuila, Manua, and Rose Atoll. And these run from east to west. There are atolls in the South Pacific, not just in the North Pacific, and those atolls are also threatened by sea level rise. Next slide. This is the island of Tutuila, and I'll just point out that harbor there where it says Pango Pango. That harbor was what attracted the US Navy to American Samoa. Benjamin Tilley floated in there in 1899 and said, this harbor is better for defense than Gibraltar. And that became the rationale for the American takeover of these islands. Next slide. There's Rose Atoll in the far east of the Samoa bioregion. Next slide. This is Swains Island, another atoll, interesting geological formations and ecosystems and human adaptations on these places. And those adaptations are threatened right now by saltwater intrusion into the soils. So next slide.
2-minute warning, Bob.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, so there are a lot of folks looking at fisheries and food sovereignty issues in Samoa, particularly around the fisheries. NOAA, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Interior, everybody's trying to figure out the proper sort of cultural co-management strategy for the fisheries. And you can see here sort of the traditional system where the chiefs would make the calls on policy related to the environment and food. And then the more contemporary sort of community engagement programs probably organized in a church, for example. But how do you, go ahead, next slide. Yeah, so I think it's all about right now for the Pacific is how do we find the balance? Climate change has its own cadre of experts and all these people circulate in a science policy bubble. How do we get more local input into meaningful adaptive responses to climate change? And we need to find a balance between indigenous knowledges and Western knowledge that we somehow canonized in the social and natural sciences. So I wanted to produce in this presentation two things. One is sort of how we're looking at this from an EPSCoR perspective, but how this connecting of indigenous Western knowledge is part of the research that I'm doing at this time. So thank you. And thank you, Sasha.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think it's just about time to move on to the next session. So hopefully if anyone has any questions, we can wait until the concluding remarks.
Certainly. Yeah.
Thank you all three for a great presentation.
I want to echo Sasha's, wow, I learned so much from Amy, Eula, and Bob, and Michael. I think I need to drink coffee, some more coffee. Just
I think you muted, Ed.
Yeah, now I'm not. I think I needed to drink more coffee to keep up with you, Bob. You did a great job. But there are some great points before we go on to the next one about sense of place and gatekeepers that Eula had brought up. And also, I really like Michael's examples of hypotheses with native science and our indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. Great job. And Bob, you bring a good question about the lasting change and how to make that long term. That's not easy answer, but it's something that I think we can work on. And Amy, I haven't forgot you. I really appreciate you saying that you wasn't from Hawaii, but you're still part of Bob's team. So that was really cool. I like that.